What's going on, Genshin Impact players? Today we're going to be talking about the Wendy's mascot, and to make her work, you're going to need a whole 4 for 4. There's a lot of expensive ways to use Nilou, and unfortunately those are the only good ways to use Nilou. But regardless of that, I want to talk to you guys about Nilou's best builds, artifacts, teams, and everything in between. This guide's going to go over Nilou's meta build and not be focused on alternative playstyles, mostly because I want to experiment with those more before I make any videos on them to make sure that I give you guys the right info. Just as a heads up, I go live a few days a week at twitch.tv/Braxophone. So if you want to come check out some live gameplay or just come hang out, make sure to come drop a follow. With all that being said, my name is Braxophone, and let's talk about Nilou. First up is Nilou's kit, and don't let these long descriptions confuse you. Nilou is an HP scaling character that revolves around Bloom teams. Now when I say Bloom teams, I mean specifically Bloom, not Hyper Bloom or Burgeon, and you'll know why in just a moment. Nilou's first passive is essentially a long description of what her entire kit is for. Basically, after you finish using her elemental skill, you'll get a buff for 30 seconds that will make Bloom cores be enhanced. The enhanced Bloom cores are called Bountiful cores, and they have a larger AoE as well as blow up faster. They also can't be used to trigger Hyper Bloom or Burgeon. Now when you take Dendro damage or are hit by a Dendro attack, including self blooms, nearby characters will get a 100 elemental mastery buff to help with bloom damage, and this can add up to be a lot of extra damage. Now with that being said, this passive is also what makes Nilou one of the most restricted characters in the entire game. This effect only works if you have Dendro and Hydro characters in your team, and only Dendro and Hydro characters in your team. If you have any other elemental characters in the team, the passive literally just will not work, and Nilou will be pretty close to useless. You can sort of cope with Vape Nilou, but I personally wouldn't recommend it. Now her second passive will give Bountiful cores a damage bonus based on Nilou's HP over 30,000. This is one of the main reasons you'll be building her HP later instead of Elemental Mastery. It's 9% for every 1k HP over 30k, and the max damage bonus you can get is up to 400%. It makes a pretty significant difference in team bloom damage. Just know that unless you're spending money on this game, you're unlikely to hit the 400% damage cap, since you'll need to go past around 74,000 HP, and this damage bonus is additive. For Nilou's elemental skill, she'll get a marker above her head that indicates how many steps she's taken in her dance. After activating her skill, you can either normal attack or use her skill again up to 3 times. The only thing that actually matters is how you end her skill on the 3rd step after her cast. If you end with a normal attack, she'll gain Hydro Infusion for 8 seconds and hit wide. If you end with her skill, she'll get a Hydro Circle around her for 12 seconds, which will help you spawn more blooms. Generally speaking, you're going to want to end with her skill. Now something interesting about her elemental skill is that even when you use normal attacks with it, they count as elemental skill damage. The animation still counts as a normal attack, similar to Raiden, so you can trigger Yelan and Xingqiao, but the damage type itself is elemental skill damage, meaning it can trigger Tenacity of the Millith and will not work with Beidou. Just a little bit of an interesting property. I found that 99% of the time you're going to want to use her skill, 2 normal attacks, and then end with her skill, because it's the fastest combo for rotations, and it also lets you trigger Xingqiao and Yelan attacks while doing her combo. It'll take a little bit of practice because honestly it seems kind of finicky when you try to mix and match skills and normal attacks, but once you get it down it'll be nice. The last 2 things about her skill is that you can technically vape the first and last hit, which will let you get the highest damage hit to vaporize, and also its cooldown is pretty long at about 18 seconds. Lastly, her burst is basically just for looks. It's Hydro damage, weight, and Hydro damage again. It's pretty useless and you could honestly never use it and be fine, but if you do use it every other rotation or so, it can be a slight damage gain based on the team. You only really need to use it for something like Vape Nilou, which again is not what this video is about. Now one thing you absolutely need to make sure that you do with Nilou is level her to 90. Not only does Bloom and Elemental Mastery's effectiveness scale with level, but she also has HP scaling, which means that you want to max out her base HP, which caps out at level 90. As for talent priority, you're going to want to level her skill for a bit of damage. Because of her HP scaling and burst value, your build for Nilou will be a bit different from standard builds. So next up, let's talk about artifacts. For most characters, stats are more important than sets, but for Nilou, that disparity is larger. The main reason is that all of the set combinations for Nilou are so close in overall team damage output that generally speaking, it just doesn't really matter which one you go with. Because of that, for a Bloom-focused Nilou, you just want to make sure that you have triple HP main stats: HP Sand, HP Goblet, and HP Circlet. This even applies before AR-45. Since Nilou's skill and burst are based on HP, building triple HP can be pretty safe. A lot of people's first instincts are going to be to go HP Sands, Hydro Damage Goblet, and a crit rate or crit damage Circlet. I understand why you would instantly go there, but it's one of those cases where it looks like you're doing more damage, but you're actually doing less in terms of overall team damage because of the bloom damage you're going to be missing. So do your best not to fall into that trap. If you're planning on using Nilou in her off-meta build, I'll have a separate video for what to do there. For sets, you basically want to pick whatever you have that helps Nilou get the HP stats that she wants, while also building Elemental Mastery on her substats, just in case she triggers a bloom. You can mix and match sets like Emblem of Severed Fate, Tenacity of the Millelith, Heart of Depth, Noblesse, Gilded Dreams, and Wanderer's Troop. For 4-piece options, you can go with 4 Gilded Dreams or 4 Tenacity of the Millelith, whichever one has better Nilou stats. The main reason you don't want to use Deepwood Memories on her is because she's generally speaking not going to be the one triggering Dendro reactions consistently, and you may lose the enemy Dendro resistance debuffs at some times, so it can be less effective on her than it would be on another character. Now, I usually mention energy recharge in these sections because uptime is very important on most characters, but as mentioned in the kit section, her burst doesn't really add that much, so you don't need to focus on using it every rotation. With that in mind, don't worry about building energy recharge on her, just focus on the other stats instead. The stats in question, those are going to be your substats, where you want to prioritize HP percent, elemental mastery, and then crit stats and attack percent. If you're using something like Favonia's sword, make sure to go for some crit rate. Now, similar to Nilou's artifact sets, there's not a lot of weapons that stand out as super exceptional for her, so let me show you what I'm talking about. In Bloom Nilou setups, Nilou's weapons basically don't matter all that much outside of her signature. The Key of Hierophany can be around 30% better than her next best weapon, and after that, the difference in damage potential is very small. Since the damage difference isn't very high, I recommend running Favonius on Nilou to generate particles for the rest of your team if you don't have her signature. Favonius generates particles on crit, which can help overall energy and burst management for any team composition. Outside of Fav, other options would be weapons like Sipho's, which will provide some elemental mastery for Nilou's blooms and also give your team a bit of energy recharge. Alternatively though, if you have Jade Cutter, you can give her that as a stat stick for personal damage, or Freedom Sworn to give your team a 20% attack buff. For free-to-play players, or for those who haven't gotten any of the above mentioned weapons, you can use Festering Desire for a skill damage buff on Nilou, craft Iron Sting for elemental mastery, or Sapwood Blade for a bit of elemental mastery to a teammate. These are all just general support weapons, and honestly, any of them are going to be good for Nilou. Now, generally speaking, I would avoid Sacrificial on Nilou just because she already takes up a bit of field time and she doesn't really need much energy recharge to function since we don't really use her burst that often. In Favonius' case, you're generating white particles, which can be beneficial to most characters in your party. You can funnel them into any character and they're getting a decent chunk of energy. However, if you use Sacrificial, you're losing a bit of field time for your other characters while also not getting white particles. You're just going to get the Hydro ones from Nilou. So I highly recommend Fav if you don't have her signature, but otherwise you can actually take a look at this weapon chart by Dirac from Kusanali mains, which is going to feature a lot of Nilou options. Nilou's got a bit of a predicament for teams at C0. Because her kit is so restrictive in that you can't have anything but Hydro and Dendro to make her work best, you have to run a very specific composition to make her worth using in any capacity. The ideal Nilou composition allows you to choose who is triggering blooms so that you can build them with full elemental mastery and maximize your damage. Ideally, with a Dendro unit that can apply Dendro consistently and quickly, you could run 3 Hydro to make a great Nilou team. For example, Nilou, Xingqiu, and Yelan would give you super high single target damage, some damage reduction, damage percent from Yelan, bonus HP from Hydro Resonance, and insane Hydro Application. This would allow for a good enough Dendro character to trigger blooms and use Nilou's abilities to deal significant damage. Now, unfortunately, at the moment, as of patch 3.1, Nilou's maximum potential can't be realized since we don't have a good enough Dendro character. However, with a future character like, I don't know, maybe the Dendro Archon or something, Nilou's team damage could be insane. In the meantime, as of right now, Nilou's best team composition is going to be Nilou, Dendro MC, Kale, and Kokomi. What this allows you to do is use Hydro Resonance for the extra HP value and the Elemental Mastery bonus from Dendro Resonance as well. Blooms deal self damage, so Kokomi will help you survive as those whittle down your health super quickly, and Dendro MC and Kale are necessary to apply enough Dendro for more bloom triggers. In this team, you can't control 100% of the blooms, so you're just gonna build Energy Recharge, Elemental Mastery on Dendro MC and Kale, and full Elemental Mastery on Kokomi. Overall, the damage from this team is pretty solid, and the clips you've seen so far are actually a little bit worse than its max potential, since not all my characters on this team are max level for max bloom damage. A triple Hydro variant with an on-field EM Dendro character will be much stronger, but for now, this is going to be your best option. As far as rotation goes, since you can't control many blooms in this team, it doesn't really matter too much. I personally like to use Nilou's skill, 2NA, and then skill, then follow that up with Dendro MC's skill and burst, Kokomi's skill, Kale's skill and burst, and back to Kokomi until Dendro MC's burst ends. That's basically the only good Nilou team you can build right now, so until another character that's like maybe, I don't know, the Dendro Archon or something, just be aware that your teams are very restricted with Nilou. Next up, I'll be explaining constellations and what's worth going for on Nilou. To be completely honest, constellations feel pretty useless without challenging content to use them in, so overall, I don't really recommend you pull for cons on Nilou, or any 5-star at this point, but just in case, here's what they do. C1 increases her end of skill damage by 65% and her skill water aura duration by 6 seconds. It's slightly better for something like Vape Nilou, but nothing super crazy. C2 is a little bit better though. It decreases enemy Hydro resistance when they take Hydro damage, which can add a lot of damage if you play her with Xingqiu and Yelan. It also decreases Dendro resistance after hitting an enemy with a bloom, which will indirectly increase your other bloom's damage, so C2 is actually a pretty significant jump in damage for your team. Now Constellation 3 increases her burst level by 3, which honestly doesn't really do much, it's just a damage increase. C4 is a 15 energy gain after her third hit of her skill makes contact, and her burst will deal increased damage afterwards. By C4, Nilou's personal damage is getting a lot better. C5 increases her skill level by 3, and C6 gives Nilou crit rate and damage based on her max HP. At C6, her personal damage is actually pretty solid, and with all of her bonus stats, you can get away with decent on-field damage. That said, there's no reason to C6 a character unless you have money to burn. If you are going to go for constellations on Nilou, I recommend stopping at C2 or C3. Those are basically my thoughts on constellations, but let's talk about my overall thoughts on Nilou as a character. I'll be completely honest with you guys. Nilou has some pretty big issues, and they're obvious. She does have a beautiful design with incredible animations, but in terms of playability and flexibility, the latter is non-existent. Nilou's personal damage isn't super great in forward vape, and her Hydro application alone isn't enough to enable Vaporize either. Her Hydro application and damage isn't as good as I'd like it to be for something like Taser, and half her kit is gone unless you restrict her to Hydro and Dendro only. And currently, as of 3.1, there's only 3 Dendro characters on the roster, and none of them apply consistent enough Dendro with high elemental mastery to make them and Nilou competitive with other meta teams. And another thing to consider is that when we do have the Dendro character we need, the team will still require multiple expensive units to compile. Don't get me wrong, lots of characters' best teams require 5 stars, but most of them can still be decent with 4 stars. In Nilou's case, you'd be looking at over a 50% team damage difference between the current recommended team with double Dendro, double Hydro, and the triple Hydro with Dendro Driver team. So with all of that in mind, Nilou is a crazy expensive unit, and to make her work, you're going to basically have to sell your soul. But if you do, you can be sure that you'll have an insanely strong team on your hands. I personally think Nilou's kit design is pretty bad, but numbers wise, if you're playing the right teams and setups, she can be pretty dang rewarding. I don't recommend the pull for her from a meta standpoint, mostly because you need the right stuff to make her a solid unit. However, if you do have the right units built for her, Kokomi, Dendro MC, Kale, and in the future, Xingqiu, Yelan, and a future powerful on-field Dendro character, Nilou will be very powerful and will be able to contribute a lot to your account. And also, she doesn't really feel clunky or anything to play either, so if you're concerned about that, it's totally fine. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to let me know by leaving a comment down below or by liking the video. By liking and subscribing to the channel, you are telling YouTube that this video does not suck, and I very much appreciate that. Once again, I go live on Twitch a few days a week at twitch.tv/Braxophone, and you should definitely come stop by. Anyways, I'll catch you guys next time, and best of luck to those of you pulling for Nilou.